Hey there, this is Rob Wall, and I'm so excited today because our guest is none other than the intellectual powerhouse, influential leader, unbelievably gifted speaker, teacher, pastor, parent, coach, knowledgepreneur, you name it, he is it. I am here with none other than Dr. Dharius Daniels in Atlanta. Sir, how are you?
Rob, I'm doing great, man. But you just had Chick-fil-A for the first time in your entire life. How was it?
There are no words, but all I would say is when you say big energy, it's never been more applicable to right now. Because if you see me sinking into my seat, you know why. But hey, it's amazing to be here in Atlanta with you.
Oh, man, thank you for coming. Glad to be with you.
First time in Atlanta. So if I was here for like a few days, what would you say are the kind of cultural things to do? Where should I go? What should I kind of visit?
You know, I'm kind of newer to the area myself, about a year in here. But, you know, I like to eat a lot. So I would probably be recommending that there are certain restaurants and things that you try.
In addition to Chick-fil-A.
Oh, yeah, we love Chick-fil-A, but we don't consider that necessarily a restaurant. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's some other places we would recommend that you kind of go and hang out a little bit.
Hey, well, it's amazing to be here with you, and I never like presuming our guests know who our speaker is. They might not have previously been privy to your stuff. So, Dr. Dharius, where do you come from? Where have you been, and how's it brought you to where you are now?
Yeah, so I'm originally born and raised in Mississippi. And so raised in a really small town there. I think when I was growing up there, it was probably like 800 people. It's about 500 and something now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, really, really small. And but anyway, grew up. Father was a bivocational pastor. And really, really kind of instilled in us hard work and excellence. And it also spent some time in the military. And so I think that kind of translated into the way that he just kind of raised my sister and I. But long story short, I go off to college. I have plans to go to law school. I get this sense of call that I'm supposed to use my life for ministry. So I pivot from going to law school. I end up going to seminary at Princeton in Princeton, New Jersey. Sitting in seminary there's this professor named Daryl Guter who's talking about missional theology and a missional church and things of that nature. That's when I got inspired to plant a church.
Amazing.
And so I came out of seminary in 2004, planted a church in 2005. It was called Kingdom Church. And we shifted our name a few years ago to Change Church. And so we're multi-site, multi-regional church. And so it's missional. So it's us kind of figuring out what expressions of church best serve the mission that God's given us and trying it and seeing what happens.
And we can't do an interview without kind of unpacking the last 2 years. Obviously, we're coming out of COVID, global pandemic, but how's it been for Change Church, for you and your leadership, your teams? Yeah, it's been change.
It's been change, but it's been, I feel like, and Rob, I think I really feel passionately about this. I feel like one of the most underemphasized aspects or areas of leadership is thought leadership. I feel like prior to the pandemic, at least here in America, we were getting very formulaic, very formula oriented when it comes to church. And so you're even going to conferences and you're learning formulas. And you're not being trained to think in terms of what is the best way to do church here, meaning the context, the city, the area, the region that God's placed you in. And so I feel like for us, the pandemic was an opportunity to kind of rethink what does church look like now. And so it's been a lot of thinking, a lot of praying, a lot of brainstorming, a lot of masterminding, a lot of experimentation. And so I'm really excited. We are not trying to resurrect the old thing. We're trying to do a new thing. We are not starting back up. We are restarting.
So good.
Because the world that we lived in prior to the pandemic no longer exists. And so I believe it would be unfaithful to the mission of the church, unfaithful to the gospel, to try to do church post-pandemic the way we did it pre-pandemic.
So good. And you're a very humble guy, even if you wouldn't say so yourself, but before the pandemic, your ministry I'd say started to pop a little bit in terms of you're doing the same things you've been doing the last 10 years,
Sure.
but maybe to bigger crowds, more influential people. And when I think of your ministry, there's quite a famous quote by Victor Hugo that says, stronger than 1,000 mighty armies is the power of an idea that's come. And when I thought of your ministry, I always thought when things started to really kick off, because as I said, I've been following you a long time, I would rewrite that quote for you and say, stronger than 1,000 mighty armies is the man whose anointing has come. And I'm not saying you weren't anointed before that,
Yeah.
but there's a real strong sense that God's timing, his hand hit you, and you're just catapulting all over the place. So from a leadership, self-leadership perspective, how did you have to adjust your mindset? Because the spotlight can become an interrogation lamp very, very quickly if your character's not ready to keep you there.
Yeah, it's so. One, thank you for that quote. That's a dope quote, by the way. Amazing.
It's a keeper.
Yeah, that means an amazing quote. I feel like to a degree. So yeah, there was an increase as it relates to influence. And like when God gives you influence, to me, like when God gives it, to a degree, it's an expression of trust. Like he gives you influence. It's like, you trust. And so I'm always honored by that trust. But to be frank, I didn't feel it as much during the beginning or even middle of the pandemic because I wasn't out as much.
True, yeah.
But as things kind of begin to settle, and as they begin to settle kind of in a new normal, and out and about and traveling a little more and things of that particular nature, I'm a little bit more aware of it now. So I still feel like I'm kind of sorting my way through it, if that makes sense. It is different, you know what I mean? But again, I'm honored by God's trust, and I want to steward that well.
And you be a self-professed hybrid, right? So you're a theologian, you're a preacher, you can do a lot of stuff. So with that, you say it's neither this or that, it can be both, and it can be two different things. So you're in a lot of lanes, you're in leadership, you're in coaching. What is leadership? Because you've just mentioned leadership as influence. And I did a very risky thing on Monday. I was in Palm Beach with Dr. John Maxwell, and you know, one of the laws, leadership is influence.
Yeah.
I threw a curveball out there and I said, you know, leadership is influence, but is all influence leadership? And he looked me in the eye and said, you know what? No. I think all leadership is influence, but not all influence is leadership. That's correct. So for you, what's your definition of it? What isn't leadership?
Yeah. So for me, leadership is going to be influencing individuals and or organizations toward their purposes. And so different people mean different things by the influence part. And for me, that's kind of like the most important part of that definition. And that is someone has to give you permission to influence them.
Yeah.
You don't have to give me permission to have authority over you. Like if I go and let's say I go and get a new job, I don't get to pick my boss. So I don't choose who has authority over me.
True.
But a person having authority over me, it means that they can kind of make me follow. Influence means you make me want to follow. And those are two different things. So the ability to influence somebody is a gift that person gives you because you've demonstrated either by your character or your competence that you are someone that they trust and desire to be influenced by. And so it's a leader. There are people who have influence that aren't leaders, but a leader has a unique ability, one, to increase that influence. Yeah. And they have an awareness, right? They know how to use the influence that they have to help that person or to help that organization or to help that team or to help that company accomplish their purpose.
So do you think as you grow in your leadership role or responsibility, you realize you start with a role, then it's results orientated, they might trust you, and then it builds up to relationship, and then you've got them, and then you can reproduce other leaders? Or for you, is it more, no, you're learning all this as you go?
It's both. So there are times where you're placed in a role, and when you're placed in a role, you got borrowed influence, meaning you're borrowing the influence of whoever put you there. Does that make sense?
So good,
So
yeah.
for example, there are people that come on my team, let's say whether it's church or business side, they come on the team. And let's say they come on a team in any kind of managerial, pastoral leadership role. Well, what they have is like positional influence right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't really have personal influence with the people that they're leading.
Mm.
So they're borrowing my influence. Does that make sense?
That's so
Yeah,
good.
so sometimes it starts that way, and then they go from borrowing my influence to developing their own influence. And that way people now follow them because they want to, not just following them because I put them in that position. So sometimes it starts that
Yeah.
way. Then there are other times where there are people who don't have roles
Mm.
and they don't have titles, but they actually are the ones that are influencing other people toward their purposes. And so sometimes the role comes first and the influence follows, and then other times the influence comes first and then the role follows.
That's so good. Could you sit around a group of people in a circle, a table, and know who the influencers are just by the way the conversation's being run? Could you kind of observe and discover who that person is quite easily now?
I would have to see a little more than that. So if you
Okay.
would have asked me that question maybe 5 years ago, I would have been like,
Would you
yes.
said yes?
But I realize now that the person who is more extroverted, the person who's more driven as it relates to their personality, the person that's more talkative, isn't always the person that has the most influence.
That's gold.
And so
That's going to set people free.
yeah, so I feel like people need to, for me at least, I need to kind of see people interact with others. I need to see not just I need to do more than hear what's said around the table. I need to see how people respond to who says what. And then that shows me more than anything else who the leader is.
And I guess, because I'm trying to layer this conversation from your journey, your leadership, to now self-leadership, because to lead outwardly, we've got to first learn to lead inwardly, as you
Yes.
talk about all the time. So how have you cultivated that self-leadership in your life that's enabled you to lead so effectively publicly and in the church and other contexts?
Yeah, there's this kind of philosophy that my mentor in the business space taught us called think, be, do, have.
Think, be, do, have.
You think, what you think determines who you be determines what you do determines what you have,
Nice equation.
right? And so it's this, and I feel like for me as it relates to the way I think about leadership and things of that particular nature, it all kind of flows from that place. So
Yeah.
this whole idea of self-leadership begins from like, what do you think about it? Like you can't get self-leadership right if you think about it wrong. And so for me, it's this seeing it, thinking about it right, drives everything else. And so I think what I realized is you cannot do your best work and you cannot have your best life if you're not your best self. And so if that's the case, then the most consequential person I will ever lead is me.
Yeah.
And so how I think about that, right? What I think determines who I be. Who I be determines what I do. Now, this is I know we're not talking about this, but this is a completely different conversation as it relates to why certain people try to do certain things and they can't do it at all, or they can't sustain it, because you haven't become the kind of person that does that consistently. So you can just try to do something consistently, it won't work. But if you become the kind of person that does that
Yes.
consistently, then you can do it consistently. And that's the way I see self-leadership.
And this flows beautifully into what we're here to talk about, because I remember, I'm 34 now, got a baby face, but I'm 34 now. And I remember in my early 20s being told by initial impressions, oh, I don't think you'd be a particularly strong leader. So you hear that and you internalize that. However, when someone comes alongside and sees something in you and calls out what someone else says wasn't put in, that's the role of a coach. And bringing that self-awareness and that sense, oh, you're telling me I can be something someone said I can't be. It's the most precious gift in the world. And from that, it completely shifted and changed the game for me. So what is coaching? Because first and foremost, it gets a bad rap from a lot of people because so many people claim to be self-professed coaches. What is a coach? What's not a coach? And the last caveat with that is, a lot of the time, and you might have said this before, we think we want to coach, but really we need a counselor. We just want to share what we're thinking all the time.
Yeah.
We think we want to coach, but actually we need a mentor. Like, help differentiate for our viewers what a coach
Got
is
it.
and what a coach isn't.
Yeah, so I'll say why a coach is needed, then what a coach is and what a coach isn't.
Awesome.
So as it relates to why a coach is needed is this. I just mentioned earlier, you cannot do your best work, you cannot live your best life without being your best self. I would also add to that, you cannot be your best self by yourself. That's a biblical principle.
Come
So no
on.
matter how much someone disagrees with it, the book, Sola Scriptura, the book, the Bible, it overrules. You know what I mean?
Every time.
Like we can have an opinion, but when we take it to the Supreme Court of Scripture,
Yeah.
it's going to render the final verdict. And the Scriptures say, 2 are better than 1. That's the book.
Come on now.
That is the book.
Come on now.
1 chases 1,000, 2 put 10,000 to flight.
Yeah.
You cannot be your best self by yourself, because all of us have what's called blind spots, and you need somebody outside of you to help you see you, you know? So sometimes those blind spots are things that are wrong that we need to get right, and sometimes those blind spots are things that are right that we don't see. And we need someone outside of us to help us do that. And that's where coaching is involved. So when we talk about coaching, we need to distinguish that from a coach, because there are people who might not identify as a coach, meaning this is my dominant form of delivering transformations to people.
Yeah.
But any effective leader has to include coaching in his or her leadership, because coaching is the only kind of transformational leadership. Jesus himself. So here's a definition of coaching, right? Coaching is a structured dialogue. So it's structured, it's dialogue, because disciples are made by dialogue, not monologue. So it's structured dialogue that uses inquiry, questions, to bring about self-discovery, to help a person move from where they are to where they need to be. So it's structured, it's a dialogue, and it uses inquiry, questions, to bring about self-discovery, because it's only when someone has self-discovery that they have ownership. They got to own it. They need to see it, right? So it's like a prophet sees, but a coach wants them to see. So a prophet sees for them. A coach has to get them to see. See the difference there? And so
Genius.
when you talk about this, I say it's the only so everybody isn't a coach, but every leader has to do coaching if they're an effective leader, if they're a transformational leader, right? So you see the power of questions in the Garden of Eden after Adam and Eve sinned, where God asked a question you already know the answer to. Adam, where are you? He know the answer to that question, but he's trying to use inquiry to bring about self-discovery, because Adam needs to know where he is. You got me?
Yes.
And so we see it in the garden with God, and we see it all throughout Jesus' ministry. Who is the master coach? All throughout his ministry. Who do men say that I am? Now, who do you say that I am? Like all throughout his ministry, you see him using questions to bring about self-discovery so that those people can move from where they are to where they need to be.
That's gold. And actually, it's the most beautiful gift you give someone, because often, I'm sure you've had this a lot, someone will tell you something that you've told them, but you framed it in a way that's a question, so they think they've come up with it themselves. Just like a great point in a message. They'll tell you, oh, this great insight from Scripture, from John 19, and you gifted that to them because you took them on a journey to get there. They think that's their, their revelation. So
that's right.
That's really special. And obviously you've been doing this for a while now. Talk me through how someone starts coaching. Did they get accredited? Did you just start asking questions? How did it work?
Yeah. So the reason the way I got introduced to it, the way I got introduced to it was an experience I had with it. So I started getting coached in 2014. And it was now, Rob, I've been in church my entire life, bro. My entire life. When I was in my mother's womb, I was in church. I've been in church my entire life, right? Yet the transformation that I saw when coaching was introduced into my formation was rapid, radical. It was revolutionary. Like I grew exponentially in ways as it relates to, not just in my morals. Because you can be living right, Rob, and not living well. People, they're like moral, but they're like overwhelmed, schedules out of balance. Does that make sense? Just stressed, hurried, busy. So, man, I got with a coach, and it changed not my morals. I was already moral. It changed my life. And so God used that experience to birth something in me And I said, hey, what this guy did for me, I want to do for someone else. And what I recognize is that he was more than someone that was just spirit-filled. He was more than someone that was sincere. He was skilled. He knew what he was doing. And you know when somebody knows what they're doing.
How did he get there? How did he get to be that?
You know, I don't know what drove him to, I don't know what his experience was with coaching, but I do know that he did what I did, or I did what he did later, which was found a mentor and got involved in programs that actually trained you on the skill of coaching. And so I think both of those things are important, because you can be a part of programs without mentorship.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
And the follow-up and the discipleship aspect
like
of
you
it.
can be a part of it. So like right now, currently as we speak, I got a program I'm training 126 coaches, transformational coaching certification. So, but as a part of their program, they get mentorship, because I think that's important, right? So there are times regularly where we're on the Zoom and it's Q&As with me, or, I was just in a session this past week, a training session with them, and one of the coaches was just getting advice on how to manage an experience she had with a client previously, where the client kind of shut down and those kind of things. So anyway, the point that I'm making is there are a lot, it's an unregulated industry. So it's just like ministry. It's unregulated, right?
That's special.
Unlike therapy is more regulated. Coaching and ministry aren't necessarily. So there are people who just kind of wake up and say they're doing it. But for me, I wanted to be skilled, so I got several trainings, and I wanted to be mentored also in it. And so there's a gentleman named Dr. Joseph Umidi, who personally mentored me and a friend of mine, and that kind of took my coaching growth to the next level.
Amazing. And obviously, you've just birthed Daniel's Den.
Yes.
Tell us what Daniel's Den is. Tell us what a Daniel is.
Yeah.
Share. We're excited to hear about it.
Yep. So Daniel's Den was something that we launched in a way. Basically, we call it a mentoring and a coaching group.
Yeah.
Because coaching is different from mentoring. Yet at the same time, I think coaches should do more mentoring.
I should say, by the way, I'm a member of Daniel's Den, card-carrying member of Daniel's Den.
Yeah,
it's
and we're
so
glad
good.
to have you. And so
It's phenomenal.
it's a coaching and it's a mentorship group. And so basically, one of the things that Daniel's Den does, so the name Daniel's Den is anecdotal. Obviously, my last name is Daniels, but it's based on this character in the Old Testament named Daniel.
Yeah.
And when you really look at Daniel, he has like world-changing impact, Rob, but he never worked at the church.
Come on now.
Look at every job Daniel had. None of his jobs were at the church. As a matter of fact, he worked with and for pagan leaders.
In exile. Whew.
Nebuchadnezzar first, then Darius of Persia next.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he literally has world-changing impact. He is doing the work of the church, not working for the church. And what is it, Rob? It's probably like 99% of the Christian population will not ever work for a church.
Yeah.
And it's like most of the conversations that we're having are catered toward the 1% that actually work for the church, and not the 99% that do not work for the church, that are supposed to do the work of the church in the world. So we say a Daniel is not just a church goer. Daniel's a world changer. So what does that mean? Daniels are God's people doing good work in the public sector for the common good, that are using their influence, their impact, and their income to change the world. So they're God's people, they're doing good work, and they're doing it in the public sector, and they're doing it for the common good.
Wow. And how do you bridge? Because obviously you'll get a lot of Christians enrolling on this.
Yes.
Do you shift the language a little bit, or is it very much like, this is for everybody? You don't have to be a believer to be in this, or is it more catered to those that are like, no, you're working 9 till 5, Monday to Friday. You need me to give you some language and help.
It's a little bit of both. Now,
equipped.
Daniel's Den is primarily believers, and that's not because we screen your beliefs before you become a part of it. It is in the church.
Yeah.
It is my hope and prayer that it'll be an evangelistic tool. because it is going to be something that we're going to be recommended, because the coaching model in Daniels Den is based on something that I created called a 4Q coaching model. And it's based on this whole idea of integration, that if you think one part of your life doesn't impact another, you're naive.
That's going to sting for someone. That stings a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, if you think one part of your life does not impact another, you are naive. Where you are spiritually affects how you are emotionally.
Yeah.
How you are emotionally affects how you are relationally. And how you are relationally, your degree of relational intelligence, affects how good a leader you are. And so if you think those things don't, if you're bad relationally, it affects you emotionally. So for me, it's say, hey, how can we use this Japanese business concept of continuous improvement called Kaizen? How can we consistently train, teach, and coach in the areas of spiritual intelligence, emotional intelligence, relational intelligence, and leadership intelligence? Spiritual intelligence, I'm a pastor. Emotional intelligence, I'm an emotional intelligence specialist. Relational intelligence is my last book. And then leadership intelligence, I also lead churches and businesses. So we kind of coach around that, because if people develop in those areas, it's only when they develop in those areas that they can be good people, God's people doing good work in the public sector for the common good.
And I love how you say you might not always have a leadership role, but you sure as heck have a leadership responsibility. 100%. So you better get with the program and get involved with this. Yeah. I'll be honest, when I got onto the platform, I was amazed by the sheer amount of content you produce. Like, I think you're the content king. I am sure you've been told this before, but the amount of content that you've pushed out over the years is remarkable. That's your personal philosophy on Daniels Den. Can you now share a bit about the practical strategy and systems you and your team have in place for creating a world-class coaching program? Because we'll have entrepreneurs, we'll have coaches, innovators watching this, and they might have the creative buzz to go off and do something similar themselves.
Yeah. Well, one, I hope more people do. Rob, we need way more coaches.
Good coaches, efficient coaches.
We need way more skilled, spirit-filled. And I say that, Rob, because the best coaches have a sixth sense.
Unpack that.
Meaning that, like, without the spiritual component, you're left with your five senses trying to discern how to serve a client or how to help a client when they get stuck. But when you've got that sixth sense, the Holy Spirit, he gives you what I call prophetic questions.
Yeah.
So a prophet might make prophetic declarations. A coach asks prophetic questions. And it helps you reach clients in ways that they couldn't be reached otherwise. Or if you never have clients, hopefully people are implementing more coaching into their leadership, so that they're actually raising up leaders and not just managing followers. Because a lot of what we call leadership is managing followers. You're not actually developing leaders, because you can tell a follower what to do. You have to train a leader how to think. And that only comes through coaching. But anyway, the point that I'm making is we kind of run that business side. We call it it's a kingdom business enterprise, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's a purpose-driven business. And that means we want to be profitable, unapologetically, but it's people over profit.
Yeah.
It's impact over income. It's relationships over resources. We will not violate that. So what we try to do is we try to model Jesus's command for believers to go the extra mile. We try to model that in the den. We try to over-deliver.
Yeah,
we try to
succeeding. You really are. Something else drops every week. Something new drops.
Yes.
Into that. So, rather than a Christian going out of the church building on a Sunday, get in their Uber, saying, "Thus saith the Lord, Uber driver, the Lord told me," we could frame a rhema word of revelation in a way that's a question.
Yes.
Contextualizing it for where he's at, and that can have an impact and further the invitation to maybe receive Jesus or
100%. 100%. I feel like a lot of what we see with prophetic ministry, Rob, is prophetic ministry training. Only works in the context of the church. So it's like hard to be in the boardroom and say, "Thus said the Lord." I mean, you can, but the Apostle Paul even talks about being conscious of how non-spiritual people in Corinth receive spiritual things. So I think prophetic questions should be utilized a lot of times in some of the other sectors of society, because very often you're not talking to people who even understand some of these things the way we do in church.
I love that. And in the same passage, he says, eagerly desire the gift.
Yes.
So eagerly desire it, and yet frame it in a way
exactly
that's going to catch their context. That's amazing. That's absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
So, all right, you've got your leadership, you've got the coaching, you've got the den. Now, what does that look like for you recording the content, writing the content, rehearsing the content? When do you have time to do that when you're also pastoring a church and doing everything else?
So I don't, and that's one of the reasons I tell people, it's not for everybody. So doing something like that, and the way I am doing Daniel's Den, every coach does not have to do that. I'm creating a lot of content. And because Daniel's Den is mentoring and coaching. So a lot of the teaching that I'm doing is more mentorship and training than it is coaching. There are coaching components, right? The lunch and learns that are every Wednesday, but there are other teaching opportunities. The book club that happens every Friday, the Zoom coaching sessions that I do from time to time. So for me, what I would say is this. When you're going to do something like this, knowledgepreneurship, you must understand that part of my job isn't just to teach. Part of my job is to learn. So learning is my job.
I love that.
Yeah. So that's how I have content, frankly. It's because I see learning as my job. So just like people structure certain aspects of their job into their day, learning is structured into my days. I've got morning reading, I got night reading. Some people don't read that much. I do, because learning is my job.
That's beautiful. So it's one of the first things on your calendar. It's like Maxwell's 5 things I do every day. Every day I read, every day I think, every day I write, every day I speak, every day I rehearse. And before 11 a.m., he's already done the most important thing, work on himself. So that's kind of what you're saying.
I feel like everybody has to you should customize it based on what you've been called to do. But if I am going to be a knowledgepreneur, it means that knowledge is going to be one of my most valuable assets. So I have to have a system in place to consistently replenish myself so that I have something to give.
And you are an original thinker in the sense, every time you listen to a Dr. Dharius message, there's new content. And even if you listen to 100 messages a week, which not many people do, you could never think, oh, Dr. Dharius has grabbed that from somewhere. So as an original thinker, is there much pressure when eyes are on you to create original content and resist the temptation not to plagiarize, but to be inspired by other things on YouTube and other places? Is there that pressure as a knowledgepreneur?
Yeah. So to me, I don't feel that pressure, right? Because I feel like, so when you talk about knowledgepreneurship, this is one of the things that I teach. So there are several different expressions of knowledgepreneurship. And one expression of knowledgepreneurship is like the authority or the /expert. And this is the person that is going to have, no one has complete original ideas, me included. Everybody is drawing from different sources. Sometimes you're drawing from sources and you forgot the sources that you're even drawing from because it's something you read or learned. I'm just like, bro, I've been reading since I was 15 years old. So it's like, I might not remember where I got that thing from 20 something years ago. You know what I mean? So it's just one of those things. But anyway, so one's the authority, but the other is a broker. And what does a broker do? A broker isn't necessarily the authority or the expert. A broker is the one who has relationships with authority or an expert. And they're able to use their relationships to bless and the benefit of the people. So I feel like, obviously, and I feel like a knowledgepreneur has to recognize when to be both. So for example, we're doing this interview today because of you. That's the only reason I'm doing it. I'm doing it because you had someone else ask, I probably wouldn't have carved out time it's been a busy week, I probably wouldn't have carved out time in my schedule to do it. So it's happening because you're brokering a relationship and whoever is watching this is benefiting from it, hopefully. And I feel like that can happen in the knowledgepreneurship space too. It's not just, I'm not just brokering in terms of like interviewing people. I'm also, there are ideas that I have been exposed to that I've gotten from other people. And I'm taking those ideas and I'm putting those ideas to people who might not be exposed to the people I've been exposed to.
I love that. And there's always a sense for creatives, isn't there, when they're connecting two different ideas, that sense you like, that I think Steve Jobs called it the fear of being found out, because these two connecting ideas that no one else has thought about, that's what's helped him to like create what he's created. So going a bit deeper now, I have permission to go a little bit deeper. You've said before pioneers suffer the most pain, and I can't imagine pioneering something like this goes without obstacles, opposition, resistance. Without going into the specifics, how has that been, firstly on a spiritual warfare aspect, but also practically trying to get this off the ground that's going out all over the world? You know, what's that been like?
It's brutal. It can be brutiful. Brutiful.
I've never heard that. That's amazing.
Brutal and beautiful at the same time.
Okay, go on. Unpack.
So this is why I think your why is important. My mentor taught me, Joseph Humidi, said, if your why doesn't make you cry, the price of commitment will always be too high. So if it wasn't for the why, I wouldn't do all of this. And so there is, right. So it's beautiful in the sense that it's beautiful. You get fulfillment out of it and you get blessed from it. You get to see, I get to see transformations on a different kind of level. So that's beautiful. It's beautiful in the sense of like, one, there is spiritual warfare that shows up in all kinds of ways. All kinds of ways, whether it's relationship stuff or family stuff or health stuff. It's just a reality of spiritual warfare. So much so, Rob, to now I'm literally, and I'm reading a book on it now so that I can structure it properly, literally about to construct a group and curate a group of personal intercessors.
Oh, I love that.
To do what Paul, like if you read Paul's like, pray for me. You know, he's like, pray for me, pray for me, pray for me. And so there's the reality of spiritual warfare. And then there's just the practical challenges of adding more things to your plate without violating your values. And so that requires some experimentation. That requires discipline and regimentation. And it's challenging.
So does your yes mean more to you now and way more than several years ago, perhaps?
Oh, man. Way more than it does. Yes costs me more now than it has ever cost me before. Like saying yes cost me more now than it ever has before, because this is what happens. Let's say someone asks me to do something a month from now. Say they ask me to do it on a Thursday, 2 o'clock, a Friday, 3 o'clock, a month from now. I could be looking at that week a month from now and say, I got margin that week to do it. But when you're leading churches and companies, now just the unpredictable organizational issues can pop up and spring up.
I love it.
And the time that you've given to something else would have been time that you used to fix something or do something or accomplish something that was a priority for your church or your companies. And you got to figure out another place to do that if you're going to be a person of your word and kind of keep those commitments.
That's it. Because I was about to say, without observing it as a judgment, it's just reality. Letting our yes be yes and our no be no is easier than ever these days to pull apart and not fulfill. Is it Henry Cloud who says integrity, the ability to meet the demands of reality? I think a lot of the time we're stressed out because we're constantly playing catch up with the decisions we made yesterday that we're regretting today.
Yes.
And so are you guarding yourself for that all the time? You've got a good team around you to say, does this align with where we're going, with our vision, with your personal values? What does it look like?
Man, you know, I think that's where my coach comes in.
Right.
Yeah, and I recently started working with another coach who also does what I do.
Amazing.
Because they have to it's real, even though coach is not a mentor, I think, and a coach doesn't have to be an expert in what they're coaching you in. The coach is an expert in change. So they don't have to be an expert in what they're coaching you in. Because I believe, and I have a philosophy when it comes to coaching, that there should probably be a little bit more mentorship involved. There's a really famous coach in the UK who, he doesn't share our belief system, but a really, really famous, effective one. I got some distant training from him, actually. And one of the things that he says where we disagree, and I think we disagree here because I'm a person of faith and he isn't, and that is the client's always the expert. I would disagree with that. I'm like, no, the creator's the expert. Not the creation is not the expert. The creator's the expert. God's the expert. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's quite counter to. I understand. I'm hesitating because I understand the concept of our culture. You know, you read the statistic, like businesses are 7% or 7 times, more likely to fail if it's built around the creator's needs rather than the consumer. But that's without pulling in the infinite creator of the universe.
Exactly.
So when you parachute that in, it's a complete game changer.
Yeah, exactly, 100%. So for me, to answer your question, it is
so good.
Because that's my philosophy, I need a coach who's going to do some mentoring, because I don't have the answer sometimes, and I need a coach who is also doing what I do, so that they can give me a little mentorship. And so I wouldn't say it's a team around me that's helping me guard, because it'd be hard for them to even understand. It's my coach, and here's the thing. I know this is random, but I feel this way about accountability, because that's part of what a coach gives you, right?
My next question was on this. Come on, roll with it.
It only works if you're honest. Coaching only works if you're honest. So he's going to ask me how my week went. If I lie,
so good.
I'm wasting time in the session.
Yes.
So if I'm like, I didn't spend enough time with my kid, or I was present but I wasn't all of this only works if you're honest.
So when we go on about accountability, actually it's an honesty issue we've got going on.
Yes. Accountability doesn't work unless you're honest. So like when people talk about, I've got accountability, I'm never impressed by that. When people mention, I've got accountability partners and I've got an accountability team and they got permission to ask me whatever, and you can lie.
Yeah. Or you could come to the situation or circumstance with a question that you've already decided the answer to. You're just wanting affirmation on that.
100%.
So would you say a good accountability structure is both affirmation and correction, or drilling down on one particular thing that you're just sensing as the other member really needs to be addressed?
Yep, I would say it is affirmation and correction. Like we said, it's remedial in one sense, that like you're correcting something.
That's
and then
good.
the other is optimization. It's something might not be wrong, but is there a better way for us to look at this? How can we get you to the next level at this? And so that's reflective of my coaching sessions from time to time.
Yes.
So when I'm going to my coach and I'm having a session with him, sometimes it's remedial. It's something's off, something's wrong with me, off with me, and I need to realign it. Something's off with my company and I need to realign it. Something's off with my church, I need to realign it. So that's remedial. That's getting me back to normal. But then there are times where this is normal, or this is going like really good.
Yeah.
But because of the way I'm wired,
Yeah.
and my like working genius, it is incessant. Can we get it better? And so sometimes the coaching is centered around that.
How much you're so big on emotional intelligence and making sure your heart set's healthy, all that stuff. Louis Giglio did an interview with Carrie Newhoff a while ago in the pandemic, and he said there's one pillow that every organization distributes to a person in that organization, and it's a pillow the leader has to sleep on every night, and it's a pillow called responsibility. You go to bed every night with that pillow to lie on. How does that play into health as a leader, as someone that's coaching others, but got to make sure you're in a place where you're healthy?
Yeah, it was so one, it's absolutely essential, and it is something man, I always want to be authentic. You know, it is something I am rediscovering right now as it relates to what is a healthy rhythm. Because the healthy, I was incredibly, insanely busy before the pandemic, but it was predictable, and there was a rhythm. And so I still have it to a degree, you know, like certain things that are biblical I'm going to have, like a Sabbath.
Yes.
And so I'm going to have it like a Sabbath. My staff understands. Company and church understand that if I hear from you on a Sabbath, this is an emergency. Like, because that's the only one of the 10 commandments we don't treat like sin. It's the only one, right? It's like, so, you know, people say, I know it's your Sabbath, but like people wouldn't say, I know I'm not supposed to kill, but I know I'm not supposed to steal, but. So the Sabbath is kind of there, but I had other rhythms prior to the pandemic. I would schedule my, a healthy leader is a master of the calendar. So I would plan out, when I planned out my year, I planned out my sabbatical, which is my extended time off. So I take one every year, and the older I've gotten and the church has gotten, the longer I've taken them. So I think this past year, I took the longest one I think I've ever taken. It might have been, I don't know, like 10 weeks maybe.
10 weeks.
Yeah, it was forever.
That's refreshing to hear.
Yeah.
Someone as well, if you can do that, there's no excuse for a lot of people.
So here's the thing. Some leaders would say, I can't do it. I would say, get sick.
Yeah, then you'll
get sick. You get sick, you're going to have to do it. So do what you would do if you got sick. And so I'm not saying everybody needs 10 weeks. I don't take 10 weeks every year. But the point that I'm making is I had rest weeks because I believe rest should be a discipline, not just a response to fatigue. But now since things are kind of like ramping back up post-pandemic, I'm trying to figure out now what does that look like for me.
That's so refreshing to hear. I'm not going to, it's such a preacher quote, and I'm not going to be able to quote it verbatim, but there's this saying, if your output exceeds your input, then your upkeep will be your downfall. And we're seeing a lot, just generally all over the church, every denomination, a lot of leaders that are struggling to sustain the weight of the responsibility they've been given. Can you just share some of the safeguards, some of the things that people watching, because we've got a lot of leaders watching, things you'd say to them in this season, coming out of the pandemic, things kicking off? What would you say to them to make sure they're working on character as well as competencies?
Yeah, you know, like you mentioned earlier, this is what I would say. I would emphasize the importance of like two things. One, to kind of get started is emotional intelligence, raising your emotional intelligence. But to me, emotional intelligence is basic. Now, if you're not a believer, that's all you can have. If you're a believer, you can have more than intelligence. You can have wholeness. Got me? Because intelligence is all about awareness and management. First quadrant, self-awareness. Second quadrant, self-management. Third quadrant, social awareness. Fourth quadrant, relationship management. So it's being aware of whatever those emotional issues are and managing them. What we believe in a God who tends to the soul, who heals the brokenhearted. All of us might not be going through heartbreak, but all of us has a heart that's broken. Mind, will, emotions, imaginations, and affections. And so I feel like this is, when you talk about the lack of health and things of that nature, it all comes not from the schedule, bro. It comes from the soul. You know what I mean? There is no app that will help you deal with drivenness. There's no calendar that helps you deal with comparison. There's no planner that helps you deal with performance orientation. And so what's weird is we bring a lot of these dysfunctional things into ministry, but culturally they're celebrated. Yeah. And so the thing that's celebrated, that's often like you're celebrated for the most, is the thing that's kind of wrecking people's souls. It's the weirdest thing. Can I give you an example, bro? Let's look at Moses. What would you think the average person would say about a leader like Moses who is sitting all day just tending to people one-on-one? Like, they probably say, no, that's a real pastor. That's a real man of God. That's how you're supposed to love the people. But his need to be needed is what was actually driving that.
And
His
as you say, you always say this, the people God was trying to pull out were the very people he prayed back in.
He prayed back in. And they became his downfall. God's like, yo, this is why I was trying to pull them out, you know what I mean, of your life. And so we would have called that admirable, but Jethro has to tell Moses, this is not good for you, and this is not good for them either. And so I don't know how it is in the UK, but I know in America, there's a culture of like hustle and grind and just work. And we bring that into ministry. And I think sometimes the people that are part of our churches also have those very same expectations. And I think pastors need to model something different for people that are in the pew, so that we aren't infected by disease for more.
Yeah. And there's this thing, isn't there, called productivity guilt, where if I'm just sitting at home with my wife and kids watching Netflix, I've got this sense someone else is working, I should be doing something, and actually letting go of that. Like 10 weeks away, you're almost confronted, aren't you, with the reality of all those things as well. Like I'm not going to be able to, I don't want to be preparing a message this Sunday. I want to be with my family. I want to chill, all that stuff. It's good discipline almost.
Yeah, it is. It is. It is. Especially when you love, when you're exercising discipline not to do something that you love. Because I
love it as well.
Yeah, I love it. But it is, rest should not be a response to fatigue. Rest should be your reaction to accomplishment. God didn't rest because he was tired. He rested because the first 6 were good.
Praise break right there. That's ridiculous. And you also say, again, listen to too many of your messages, I'm just quoting everything back to you, but when you say because the anointing was on Moses and his face was shining on the outside because everything he touched turned to gold, it erroneously assumes that he was healthy on the inside.
Yes.
And then you go into your Numbers, is it Numbers chapter 20, and he strikes the rock twice, so it's not a mistake.
It's not a mistake.
Instead of speaking to it, and bam.
Yeah, 100%. And that can manifest itself in contemporary forms, right? So whatever our proverbial speaking to the rock is, or hitting the rock as opposed to speaking to the rock, that can happen to all of us. Here's one of the things that we keep talking about, this idea of rest. The writer of Hebrews, and of course they're talking about works from the law, rest from the works of the law and things of that nature. But I think the principle still applies. Rest requires faith.
Can you say that again, please?
Rest requires faith, because rest is resistance to the cultural notion that in order to do more, I have to do more. So I don't believe you sacrifice. I don't believe you're sacrificing productivity with rest. I don't believe just because somebody's working when you're resting, they're going to end up further faster. I believe God can do more in 6 days with an optimal you than other people can in 7 when they're worn out, not replenished, and things of that nature, especially if you're a content creator. Because after a while, you're going to start repeating yourself if you're not fresh.
True. And I'm not putting words in your mouth, but you just say everyone's anointing's different. You say God only anoints the authentic self. That also suggests when our anointing's created, it's created from different ingredients for what you're being called to, right?
Yeah.
So you're called to coach, to pastor, to lead. You're definitely pioneering this. So there must be a sense in which your lane now. You're loving your lane. You're not trying to deviate from that. That must bring some freedom to you. What would you say to someone that's constantly looking to their left and right? So we nearly wrap up. But what would you say to someone looking to their left and right thinking, I've still not found my thing. I like a little bit of that. I like what they do. I've got decision paralysis.
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is, yes, 100, you are right. I want to affirm something that you said. It is the most freeing and fulfilling season of ministry for me. And it is because I found my lanes. And I think internally, everyone knows them. I think the struggle is a couple of things. It's embracing it. It's accepting it. It's believing your slingshot is enough.
Oh.
I think internally people, and so let's say like for me, Rob, when I first started like sharing with, and these are some people that I like respected greatly who was speaking into my life. When I started sharing with them some of the passions I had for, let's say like coaching or multi-site church and all of that, it wasn't always encouraged. People didn't speak favorably about that. They made me feel like I was all over the place. I've had pastors, like I literally had pastors who told me like, I don't think you should be a senior pastor. I think you should like work at a church and just like do, write content and travel and speak and things of that particular. Like I literally had people tell me that. And it's amazing because like when you look at even what God's done in our church now, it is, you understand, it's like to some degree, not comparing, but there's a degree of fruitfulness that we're seeing in our church that's a bit different from the churches of some of the people that were actually telling me that I shouldn't be pastoring. You know what I mean? And so it's weird. And it's really weird now. I'm looking back now. It's like, So the point that I'm making is internally I knew. I think I was just searching for affirmation from people. Who couldn't understand it. And so what I learned is I don't need all people to get it. I just need the right people to get it.
Sheep know the sound of their shepherd's voice.
100%. And so, man, once you find your lane and just, Judd Wilhite put it this way. He spoke this at a conference I was at years ago. I never forgot it. He said, love the calling you have, not the one you wish you had. So I love my calling. I don't want anyone else's. I don't want anyone else's calling. You and I had conversations about this though before, when we talked about like even the model of the current pastor now is not like Spurgeon-ish.
No,
it's not Spurgeon. It's not Martin Lloyd-Jones. It's not people who were thinkers and theologians and I just resonate with that. I'm like, that's what I'm called to be. And it might not be a bunch of us out here, but that's who I am. And I don't know if I could do a conference on that, but this is my lane and I'm running in it.
Hey, how can our viewers continue to follow your journey and your ministry and what you're doing here at Change Church?
Well, obviously there's the website stuff, but I don't even know if that's the place I would direct people right now. So you've got danielsden.com for people.
How do you sign up to that? Can you? Is there a waiting list still?
Yeah, well, you know what? There was a waiting list, but it was just like we'd open a waiting list. It was just pop. So it's open enrollment now. So people can sign up whenever they want.
Sign up right now. You will not regret it. I promise you.
Yeah. So you got danielsden.com, DariusDaniels.com, but YouTube, we got all kinds of content there. And we use YouTube also to make people aware of the different programs and things like that we're launching. But there's a lot going on, man. You know, we're training coaches now. Like I just said, it's 120 some coaches. We're training this first round, and I've got an inner circle, a mastermind group of knowledgepreneurs. So these are faith-based marketplace leaders who want to learn how to do things like Daniel's Den and all of that. And so we're walking them through it. It's a lot, but it's great. We love it.
Incredible. Well, thanks so much for all you do. And I was on the way over. It's a long flight from London to the US, as you know. I was thinking, how could I say something that would honor you, Doctor? And I was, going through a few things in my mind. And I thought, I know what I'm going to say, because this is so true and it just resonates. I'm going to say, I really believe you're the next John Maxwell. Wait. But then I thought, I remember reading a book from John, and he was saying everyone talked about management for years. Then he wrote a leadership book, and he said the reason he believed it popped was because he was the first. And what I want to say to you, and I represent a whole load of people sitting in this chair, I feel the message for you is you're the first.
Well, thanks, man. That's so encouraging.
So thank you for everything you are. Thank you for everything you bring. And we look forward to chatting again soon. Thanks for your time.